Only your word be spoken and your word be heard. Amen. Good morning. In 2018, a blockbuster movie came out, and it eventually became the 9th highest grossing movie of all time. And it is called Black Panther. Like many of the Marvel movies of the past 15 years, Black Panther is the origin story of a superhero. The main character is T'Challa, who is the Prince of Wakanda and also the Black Panther. At the beginning of the film, T'Challa's father, King T'Chaka, was recently killed in a terrorist attack while on a diplomatic mission. And T'Challa feels an immense amount of guilt that he was not able to save his father. So T'Challa returns to Wakanda, where he is eventually crowned as the new king. And then he participates in a ritual that sends him to the ancestral plane, a place outside of time, filled with a strange purple light, where the souls of Wakandans go when they die. In the ancestral plane, T'Challa encounters a tree, and in the tree are the sparkling yellow eyes of a number of Black Panthers. One of the panthers jumps down out of the tree, and it eventually transforms into T'Chaka, his father. T'Challa, riddled with grief and guilt and uncertainty, falls to his knees before his father, the king. But T'Chaka immediately reaches down and pulls him back up to his feet and affirms to T'Challa that he is king now. And T'Challa tells his father that he doesn't think he is ready for what will come next. And T'Chaka tells him that he already knows everything he needs, that he should trust the wisdom of his ancestors that was passed down from father to son. This is a turning point in the film because after this moment, T'Challa is able to embrace his identity as both the king and as the Black Panther, and to move forward in his mission to protect and serve the people of Wakanda. And I think Jesus is having a similar kind of moment in the story of the Transfiguration. Immediately prior to this story in Luke's text, Jesus has a discussion with his disciples. And in that conversation, he asks them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" And they respond, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, or maybe one of the prophets." And then he asks them, "Who do you say that I am?" And that is when Peter first names Jesus as the Messiah. Jesus responds by asking his disciples not to tell anyone that he is the Messiah, and points out that the Messiah will undergo great suffering and rejection and be killed, and will then be raised on the third day. And I think we often hear that passage of Jesus with his disciples as if he is testing the disciples in some way. Pop quiz, guys. Who do you say that I am? But what if that passage is less about what's going on with the disciples, and it's more about what is going on with Jesus? What if the 100% human side of Jesus is having some questions about what it means to be the Messiah, about whether or not he wants to be the Messiah? After all, the Messiah is the one who must suffer and be ridiculed and then be killed. Who in their right mind would want that job? So Jesus decides to take his closest disciples with him and go up a mountaintop to pray. And while he is praying, he has a transformational experience. It is as if Jesus steps outside of time to a place with a strange white light. And he has a conversation with Moses and Elijah, his forebears, his ancestors in faith. And unlike how Mark and Matthew tell this story, Luke actually tells us what it is that they were talking about. Luke says they were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. They were speaking to him about the suffering and rejection and death that Jesus is worried about, and they are giving him context. For centuries, people have read the story of the Transfiguration, and they have equated Moses with the law and Elijah with the prophets, the major voices and themes of the scriptures that Jesus himself would have known and read. The law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah. The law and the prophets are explaining to Jesus who he is and what that identity means. Because Jesus only makes sense in the context of the law and the prophets. The full truth of God's reconciling action in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ can only be understood in the context of his history and of his people. Moses and Elijah are his forebears, his ancestors and faith, and it's not until he spends time with them and hears God's voice claim him as his beloved son once again. It's not until that Jesus truly understands who he is, that he is able to set his face toward Jerusalem and begin the journey that leads to both the crucifixion and the resurrection. And I think that is a deep human truth. We as individuals can only make sense of ourselves in light of our ancestors who have come before us, through conversations with our forebears and reckoning with our own family histories, both the wonderful things and the challenging things too. I mean, maybe you're like me, and you have addiction somewhere in your family history. Then it's important to acknowledge it, name it, and let that information inform your future actions. It doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to define them. But you need to know that story of your ancestors. And the same thing applies with mental illness or financial problems or heart disease. Those family stories affect who you are today. Or maybe it's like my husband's family, the story of his grandmother, who raised 3 daughters while getting her master's and her PhD in English in the 1950s. And she went on to become the first female professor at the college where she ended up teaching for decades. She became the chair of the English department. Those kinds of stories affect who we are. So, at the end of the Black Panther, T'Challa is nearly killed in battle, and so he returns to the ancestral plane. His father invites him to remain in the afterlife with his ancestors, but after the revelations of the film, T'Challa painfully recognizes the mistakes that his ancestors made, and that he now needs to return to the world to repair. That his mission isn't only to protect and serve the people of Wakanda, but actually to protect and serve the whole world. It's a decision that he never would have been able to make if he hadn't spent time learning the stories of his ancestors, of his people, and perhaps hearing them in a new way. And that is the Transfiguration. Jesus, in consultation with his ancestors, Moses and Elijah, hears the stories of his people in a new way, and then is fortified to go and do the hard and painful work of saving the world. Not just for the people of Israel, but for all of the children of God. And so I invite you in the coming weeks to spend some time with your ancestors, with the stories of your people that are found in our holy scriptures, with the stories of your families, both the wonderful ones and the challenging ones. Is it possible for you to hear those stories in a new way? And if so, how might those stories fortify you to go forward and do the hard and painful work of making the world a better place?